Clara Bowes pressed her spine straight and kept her chin up, because that was the only thing left she could control. The letter was still in her coat pocket. She had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. Reliable household position. Room and board provided. Immediate start. She had packed everything she owned into one trunk and one canvas bag, said goodbye to a town that had never fully claimed her, and ridden 4 trains across 3 states to get here. And Mrs. Alderton had looked at her for exactly 4 seconds before saying, "The position has already been filled." Clara had stood on that porch step and counted to 3 inside her head. She had asked quietly whether there had been some mistake, whether the letter might have been sent in error. Mrs. Alderton had looked at her the way a woman looks at something she has decided is beneath consideration, and closed the door without another word. That had been 3 hours ago. Now Clara sat on the only bench outside the Millhaven depot with her trunk at her feet and $5.20 to her name, and no train heading anywhere useful before morning. She had asked the station agent if she could wait inside. He had told her the waiting room was for ticketed passengers only. She had a ticket, yesterday's, from the last leg of the journey. He had looked at it, looked at her, and said, "That one's spent." So she sat on the bench and watched the afternoon press down on Millhaven, Texas, like a hand that wasn't going to lift. She was 24 years old. She had been managing on her own since she was 16. She had survived a closed factory, a flooded boarding house, 2 winters with barely enough for firewood, and a family that had made it quietly clear there was no room for her at any table they set. She had survived all of it, but surviving and living were 2 entirely different things. And she was so tired of surviving, she unwrapped the small piece of bread she had left from the morning and ate it slowly, not because she was hungry, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She was folding the cloth back when she heard them, 2 voices, high, fast, tumbling over each other like water over stones. "I want to check the board." Papa said, "Stay close." "I am close. I'm right here next to you." "That is not what close means." Clara looked up. 2 girls came around the corner of the depot at a dead run and stopped short when they saw her. They were identical in every way that mattered, the same dark braids, the same dust on their hems, the same wide brown eyes that were now fixed on Clara with the open, fearless curiosity of children who had not yet learned to pretend they weren't looking. They couldn't have been older than 6. The one on the left tilted her head. "Who are you, Clara? Are you sitting out here, waiting on a train?" One on the right, smaller by half an inch, more serious in the eyes, looked at Clara's trunk, at the canvas bag, at the careful way Clara was holding herself together. "You got nowhere to be," she said, not unkindly, just plainly. Clara blinked. Children had a way of finding the exact center of a thing without meaning to. "Got plenty of places to go," she said. "I just haven't settled on which one yet." Serious twin considered this. "That's what Papa says when he doesn't want us to worry." "Nora," the other one said like a warning. "Well, it is." A shadow moved over all 3 of them. Clara looked up. The man was tall, the kind of tall you noticed before you noticed anything else. He had his hat in his hand, which she would come to understand was something he did when he was about to say something that cost him something. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent most of their lives outdoors and didn't apologize for it. His eyes were serious without being hard. He looked at his daughters first. "What did I say about running ahead?" The talkative one, Nora, apparently had the grace to look slightly guilty. "You said don't. And we wanted to check the board," the quiet one said, presenting it like a legal argument. "There's nothing on the board." He set his hat back on his head and looked at Clara, and unlike every other person who had looked at her today, he did not look away. "Beg your pardon, miss." "They don't always," he seemed to search for the right word. "They don't always," Clara almost smiled. She caught it. "They weren't any trouble," she said. "Your girls are fine." He glanced at the trunk, at the canvas bag. His expression didn't change much, but something in it shifted, not pity, more like the particular recognition of someone who had seen a hard day and knew what one looked like. "You come in on the noon train?" "Yes, sir." "Headed somewhere?" "I thought I was." She held his gaze. "Turned out I was wrong." Something moved through his eyes, quick there and gone. He turned the brim of his hat once between his fingers. "Alderton House?" he asked. Clara felt the cold surprise of it move through her. "You know about that? Small town. And Mrs. Alderton has sent away 3 women in the last 4 months. All came in on the train, all left the same way. Clara pressed her lips together. She had a word for what that was, but it wasn't a polite one. It's a hard thing to know after the fact. It is. He wasn't making excuses. He was just saying it was true. You have people here, anyone expecting you. No, hotel, she looked down at her bag, $5.20, not yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched down to the girl's level and said something too low for Clara to catch. She heard the quiet one, Nora, say, "Yes, Papa," with a certainty that seemed to settle something. He stood back up. "Miss Bowes, Clara Bowes." Holt Calloway. He held her gaze with the directness of a man who said what he meant and didn't build up to it. "I've got a proposition, and I want you to understand it comes from nothing but a practical need. You can say no, and that's the end of it." Clara straightened. "I'm listening. I run the Calloway Ranch about 5 miles out, working spread cattle, horses, some crop. My housekeeper left 6 weeks ago. Family trouble, had to go back east. I've been managing the house and the girls on top of everything else since then." He paused, choosing his next word with care. "I'm losing ground. You need a housekeeper. I need someone in that house while I'm working. Cook, manage things, keep these 2 from dismantling what's left." The corner of his mouth shifted barely, aimed somewhere in the direction of the talkative twin, who looked extremely innocent about whatever she had most recently taken apart. "Honest work. Room and board plus wages. Month trial, either of us can walk away clean if it doesn't suit." Clara looked at him, then at the girls. The talkative one had grabbed her sister's hand without seeming to notice she'd done it. The quiet one was watching Clara with the patient, measuring focus of a child who had learned that the important things happened in the spaces between words. "Papa makes decent biscuits," the talkative one offered helpfully. "He just burns them about half the time." "It's true, that," Holt said with the particular expression of a man holding on to his dignity by a thread, "is not the relevant point." Clara pressed her lips together hard. "Appreciate the offer, Mr. Calloway," she said carefully. "I want to be straightforward. I've done housekeeping work and I'm capable of it, but I don't know you and you don't know me, and I want to understand what you're expecting before I agree to anything. That's reasonable. I'd want it clear that my position is professional. I'm an employee." She chose her next words with precision. Nothing else. Something moved behind his eyes, something that might have been the beginning of something complicated, but he kept his face even. "Also reasonable. Agreed. If the situation turns out to be different from what you've represented, I'll leave. No hard feelings, but I will leave, Miss Bowes," he said quietly. "I'll be plain with you. The last woman who was direct with me was my wife. She passed 2 years ago this spring. I have no interest in making your situation harder than it already is, and no interest in anything but a fair arrangement." Clara looked at the girls. Nora was watching her with bright, barely contained hope. The quiet one, she still hadn't learned that name, was holding very still in the way children hold still when they are trying hard not to influence a decision while doing absolutely everything in their power to influence it. She picked up her canvas bag. "Month trial," she said. "Both parties walk away clean." "Yes, ma'am. Before the month is out, I want to know what happened to your wife. Not tonight, but I want to hear it from you before I piece it together on my own." He held her gaze for a steady moment. Then he nodded once. "That's a fair thing to ask." The quiet twin tugged his sleeve. "Does she get Mrs. Dunbar's room?" "Nora," he said. "It's the one with the window that faces the creek," she informed Clara, entirely unbothered. "It's the nicest one. I put flowers in it last week." "They were dead when you put them in," the quiet one said. "They were not completely dead. There is no such thing as not completely dead." This time Clara did smile. She caught it almost in time, almost. She looked away before either of them could see it fully. Something moved through her, warm and quiet and not entirely safe. She recognized it and made a note to be careful. "Lead the way, Mr. Calloway," she said. The wagon was out front, a working wagon, no pretension to it, pulled by a solid bay mare who turned one ear toward Clara as she approached and seemed to decide she was acceptable. Holt loaded her trunk with the efficiency of a man who didn't make a performance of simple tasks. He helped the girls up first, both of them clambering over each other for position. Then he held out his hand for Clara. She hesitated for one breath. That hand, steady and calloused, offered without comment. She took it and climbed up. The depot agent came out onto the platform as they pulled away and watched them go with the relieved expression of a man who had decided something was someone else's problem now. Clara did not look back at him. She looked at the road ahead, at the flat Texas scrubland shimmering in the late afternoon heat, at the enormous sky going amber at the edges. "Miss Clara," Nora said from directly behind her. "Do you know how to do hair?" "Nora," Holt started. "It's a reasonable question, Papa." "It's all right." Clara glanced back. Both sets of braids were in a state of significant disrepair. She felt something press quietly against her ribs. "Yes, I know how to do hair." Nora sat back with the satisfaction of someone whose research had confirmed a theory. The quiet twin, she still had not given her name, looked at her sister, then at Clara, and something shifted in those careful eyes. Something small. A door opened to just a crack. Holt kept his eyes on the road, but she saw his grip on the reins ease slightly, something releasing in his shoulders that she suspected had been there a long time. The road unrolled ahead. The heat pressed down on everything. Clara kept her back straight and her eyes forward and held very still around the feeling she was not yet ready to name. 2 miles out, Nora fell asleep against her sister's arm. The quiet twin stayed awake, watching the land with her old eyes. Holt spoke without preamble. "Ranch hands eat at 6. I try to get back to the house at noon but can't always manage it. Supper at 7, right? Girls are up at 5:30. Nora moves fast. Rosie moves slow. Don't take it personal." A pause. "Don't let Nora near the henhouse on her own. She means well." "Understood." "Well, pump sticks. You have to hold the handle down and pull at the same time. The stove runs hot on the right side. Left front burner is reliable." "Mr. Calloway." "Yes, ma'am." "Managed households before. I'll learn the stove." A silence. Then the corner of his mouth moved the smallest possible shift. "Yes, ma'am," they rode quietly. The sky was going to rose and copper now, the worst of the day's heat loosening its grip. The quiet twin had tucked her chin toward her sleeping sister. "Miss Bowes," Holt said, still looking at the road. "Yes. I said back there about needing someone in the house." He stopped. Started again with more care. "I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to be anything to them other than a steady presence. They've had too many people come through and leave. I'm not looking to add to that." A pause, and this one carried weight. "But they need someone who shows up, who's there in the morning and there at night, who sees them." He cleared his throat. "That's all I mean." Clara looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the straight, unapologetic posture of a man who had been carrying things alone long enough that he'd stopped noticing the weight. "I understand," she said. "I just wanted to be plain about it." "You were plain. I appreciate that." Ranch came into view, a long, low house, a barn, a corral, summer brown grass stretching out in every direction. Clara catalogued it without feeling anything about it yet. It was too soon. But she noticed, as Holt turned the wagon through the gate, that a row of cottonwood trees caught the last light beyond the main house, and the wind moved through them in a long silver wave. And the sound of it was the most beautiful thing she had heard in longer than she could easily say. She didn't mention it. She looked at the road and breathed. One night, she told herself. That was all she had agreed to. She would stay one night, assess with clear eyes, and decide in the morning. The quiet twin woke as the wagon pulled up. She blinked at Clara with those ancient child eyes, and then said, quietly and with complete seriousness, "I'm glad you came." Clara kept her face even. It was harder than it should have been. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments. Let's find out how far this one travels. Rosie's words followed Clara through the front door. "I'm glad you came." 6 words from a child who looked like she had learned early not to say things she didn't mean. 6 words, and something had rattled loose in Clara's chest that she was not prepared to examine. So she did what she always did with things she wasn't ready for. She found something useful to do with her hands. The kitchen told her everything about Holt Calloway in under 2 minutes. The cast iron was well seasoned and hung in the right order. The flour bin was full. The coffee pot was the kind that had been in daily service for 10 years and was better for it. But the plates were stacked wrong, shoved in rather than set, and there was a split in the table leg held together with a strip of leather, and the curtain over the window hung crooked from a rod that had been knocked loose and never straightened. A man doing his best with not enough hands. Clara recognized it because she had lived it. "You can leave your things by the stairs," Holt said, coming in behind her. "I'll show you the room." She was already at the cold box. "Have the girls eaten since midday? Biscuits around noon. It's past 6. She pulled out the eggs. "Do they have preferences or do they eat what's set in front of them?" "They eat what's set in front of them," Holt said firmly. At the exact same moment, Nora appeared in the doorway and announced, "I don't like parsnips." "You'll eat parsnips," Holt said. "Eat them. I'm just telling her so she knows." Clara turned back to the counter to hide what her face was doing. "Go wash your hands," she said to Nora. "Both of you, and don't tell me they're already clean." A pause. Then small feet retreated down the hallway. Holt stood in his own kitchen and said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, with the weight of a man who did not say this kind of thing easily, "Thank you." She didn't make anything of it. "You can set the table if you want something to do." He set the table. She cooked. The girls came back with damp hands and sat down and watched her with the particular careful attention of children who had learned not to trust good things too quickly, who waited to see whether the good thing was real. Clara understood that. She kept her movements steady. She didn't talk too much. The eggs came out right. The salt pork crisped properly. She found cornbread from the morning, still good, and warmed it. When she set the plates down, Nora looked at hers with an expression equally divided between suspicion and hope. "You didn't put parsnips in." "There weren't any parsnips." "Oh," Nora considered this. "That's lucky." Rosie said nothing. She picked up her fork, took a bite, and then looked across the table at her father with an expression Clara couldn't fully read, something between "see" and "I told you" and something else entirely, something too private for either of those words. Holt looked back at his daughter and gave one small, quiet nod. Clara sat at the end of the table and picked up her own fork and told herself with great firmness that she was not going to cry over eggs and cornbread in a stranger's kitchen. She had more dignity than that. It was a near thing. After supper, Holt showed her the room. It did face the creek. The window was open and there was a dried flower on the sill, not fully dead but close, and the room smelled like cedar from the chest in the corner. There was a quilt on the bed in a double wedding ring pattern, the colors faded to something gentle. "Dunbar made that," Holt said from the doorway. "Left it behind, said she had too many quilts at home." Clara touched the edge of it. "It's beautiful work." "Was here 9 years. The girls, especially Rosie, she took it hard when she left." He was quiet for a moment. "Want you to know that's not a burden I'm putting on you. I'm just telling you so you understand why Rosie's careful. She's protecting herself," Clara said. "Yes, that's sensible. She is a sensible child." Something crossed his face, pride, and underneath it something raw. "She is." He cleared his throat. "Water's in the pitcher. I'll be up before 5 if anything's needed." "Mr. Calloway," she turned. "Your wife, you said you'd tell me before the month was out." He went still. "Not asking to be difficult," she said. "I'm asking because I've walked into situations before without the full picture and it cost me. You don't have to tell me tonight, but soon." He looked at her for a long moment. He was a man, she was learning, who did not look away from things. "Her name was Me," he said. "She died 2 years ago this spring. Fever came fast and didn't give her much time. A breath. The girls were 4. They remember her in pieces. Rosie more than Nora, I think, though neither one talks about it much." He was holding the door frame the way a man holds something when he needs to stay in one place. "Hardest part is that she knew before I let myself know. And she spent her last good days trying to tell me things she thought I'd need, things she wanted me to hear." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't ready." Clara said nothing. Some silences needed to be left alone. "One of the things she told me," he said, quieter now, "was not to let those girls grow up without a woman in the house who genuinely cared about them, not just someone doing a job." His voice came out rougher on the last words. "I've been trying to honor that." "You brought 3 women out from the station," Clara said, "not an accusation, just a fact. The 4th." He met her eyes, and the first one both girls walked toward. That landed somewhere deep. She didn't let it show. "Some sleep, Mr. Calloway," she said. "You look like a man who hasn't slept properly in weeks." Corner of his mouth moved. "That's an accurate read." He tipped his hat, old habit, she already recognized it, and stepped back from the door. "Good night, Miss Bowes. Good night." She listened to his boots on the stairs, then to the quiet of the house settling. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her hands in her lap and looked at the dried flower on the windowsill. I'm glad you came. One night she told herself. That's all she'd agreed to. She blew out the lamp. She lay down. She listened to the cottonwoods outside. She was asleep faster than she had been in months, which was either a good sign or the kind of thing that looked like a good sign and wasn't. She didn't let herself decide. She woke at 5 without any help from anyone. Old habit. She dressed quickly, got the stove lit, and had coffee on before she heard the first footsteps on the stairs. She knew by the speed fast, no pause between steps, that it was Nora. Already up, Nora said, arriving in the doorway with her left braid listing sideways at a dramatic angle. Having apparently come most of the way undone overnight. I am. Don't touch the stove. I know not to touch the stove. Clara started the oats. Nora climbed into her chair and put both elbows on the table and watched with the focused attention Clara was already learning to expect. Did you sleep all right? I did you? I woke up once, but I went back. A pause. I have bad dreams sometimes. Clara kept her hands moving. What kind? Ones where Papa goes out to the far pasture and doesn't come back. Nora said it plainly, without drama, the way children deliver the things that frighten them most. It's not real, though. He always comes back. Does, Clara said steadily. Dunbar used to say some people are just the coming back kind. Nora propped her chin on her hand. Are you? The question hit Clara between the ribs. She kept the coffee moving. I'm here right now, that's what I can promise. Nora studied her. Then, apparently deciding this was sufficient for the moment. Rosie thinks you're going to stay. Rosie doesn't know that. Doesn't think it. She feels it. She's different from me. I think things and she feels things. This was delivered without envy, as simple natural law. She said last night when we were in bed that you smell like someone who has been traveling a long time but was trying to get somewhere real. Clara was very glad she was facing the stove. That's a complicated thing to smell, she said, when she trusted her voice. Rosie's complicated, Nora confirmed. The slower footsteps on the stairs were Rosie, one step, pause, next step, the careful measured pace of a child who was still half asleep, and intended to remain that way for as long as possible. She appeared in the doorway with one boot on and one in her hand, stopped when she saw Clara at the stove, and something moved through her face, quick and guarded, and then smoothed away. She sat. She pulled on her second boot. She looked at the table, then quietly, like she was testing the weight of a word. Good morning, Miss Clara. Morning, Rosie. Holt came through the back door at 5:45 carrying the smell of the barn and the early morning. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, both girls seated, oats on, biscuits warming, coffee ready, and something moved through his face that Clara almost looked away from because it felt too private. He pulled his hat off instead. You didn't have to. Eating's practical, she said. Sit down, Mr. Calloway. He sat. He ate. He didn't make a production of it, which she appreciated more than she expected. There was a kind of man who performed gratitude and a kind who simply received things. He was the second kind. They were halfway through breakfast when Rosie looked up from her oats and said, without preamble, Are you going to leave like Mrs. Dunbar did? Holt set his fork down. Rosie, I'm asking because I want to know. Her voice was steady with the firmness of someone 3 times her age. People leave and nobody tells us why. Papa gets quiet and he thinks we can't tell, but we can tell, so I want to know. Kitchen went still. Clara looked at this child, that set jaw, those old, careful eyes. A 6-year-old who had decided that being ready for loss was better than being surprised by it. She knew that jaw. She had worn it herself since she was 7 years old. I can't promise you forever, she said. I won't do that because it wouldn't be honest, and I think you're too smart for promises that aren't honest. Rosie held very still. What I can promise is this: if something changes, if I'm going to go, I'll tell you before I leave. You'll know, it won't just happen. Clara held the child's gaze. No one will disappear on you, not from me. Something cracked in Rosie's face, just a flash, raw and young and desperate, and quickly pressed back down. Then she looked at her oats. Okay, she said, quiet, small. Holt picked up his fork. Clara noticed his hand was not entirely steady. If you're still with us, you already know this story has teeth. Don't forget to like this video. It helps more people find it. She found her footing in the house the way she found it everywhere, by paying attention to the things people didn't say. The leather-bound table leg told her he hadn't asked for help with it. Too proud, or too tired, or both. The crooked curtain rod told her he'd noticed the house coming apart and hadn't had time to stop it. The laundry pile behind the washroom door told her 6 weeks of barely managing. She didn't fix everything at once. That was the wrong kind of help, the kind that made a person feel like a problem being solved. She fixed the table leg because it was a safety issue quietly, while Holt was at the barn. She straightened the curtain rod because it took 30 seconds. She started the laundry because the girls were going to run out of clean dresses by Thursday. By mid-morning, Nora had attached herself to Clara's general orbit the way a small, enthusiastic planet attaches to something with more gravity. She talked about the horses, about a girl at Sunday service named Penny who had made an unforgivable comment about Rosie's braid, about whether a dog could be trained to fetch specific items by name, about what she thought lightning was actually made of. Clara answered the questions that had answers and let the others breathe. Rosie kept her distance in the house nearby, but finding her own tasks, feeding the chickens, straightening her room, reading on the porch with the focused seriousness of a child who took her responsibilities to books personally. She didn't seek Clara out, but she didn't leave any room that Clara entered. That was something. The crisis arrived at 11:30, as crises do without warning from a completely unexpected direction. Nora came through the back door at a flat run, her face carrying the specific combination of triumph and preemptive guilt that belongs exclusively to someone who has done something they knew was going to be a problem and did it anyway. "I found something," she announced. "Where?" "By the south fence, past the creek marker." Clara dried her hands. "What kind of something?" Nora opened both palms. In them, trembling, eyes barely open, was the smallest rabbit Clara had ever seen, a few weeks old at most. Its ears were translucent, its heartbeat was visible in its tiny chest. "Nora," Clara said carefully. "No, I wasn't supposed to go past the marker, but I heard something and it was just there and I couldn't leave it." Nora's voice had developed a wobble. She was fighting hard. "It's going to die if we don't do something, Miss Clara. I can tell. I can just tell." Rosie appeared in the doorway, drawn by whatever twin sense operated between them, looked at the rabbit, looked at Nora's face, and then looked at Clara. "Can we save it?" she asked. Just that, no performance. The straight question. Clara looked at the rabbit. She looked at the two faces watching her. Nora's desperate hope. Rosie's careful, guarded, wanting to hope. Something in her chest moved with a slow, tectonic weight. "Bring it to the table," she said. Nora's exhale moved her whole body. They spent the next 40 minutes doing what could be done: warmth, diluted cow's milk on the corner of a soft cloth, the slow, patient work of coaxing something fragile back from an edge. Clara showed Nora how to hold it, cradled and supported. She showed Rosie how to offer the milk, just a drop, nothing forced. Holt came in at noon and stood in the doorway and looked at the three of them bent over the table. Clara caught his eye over the girls' heads and gave a small shake. "Not yet. Let them have this." He read it exactly right, stepped back out, came back in a minute later making more noise on the steps, and walked in saying, "What have you got there?" "We're saving it," Nora said, not looking up. "Miss Clara knows how." He looked at Clara. She was guiding Rosie's hand, saying something quiet about the pressure of the cloth. He stood in his own kitchen in the middle of his ordinary noon and watched this woman who had arrived yesterday with a trunk and nowhere to go, bent over a nearly dead rabbit with his daughters on either side of her, all three of them breathing in the same careful rhythm. And Holt Calloway, who was not a man who was surprised easily, felt something shift in his chest, heavy and slow and irreversible. Like a stone turning over in deep water, final, leaving something exposed underneath that had been covered for a long, cold time. He sat down at the table. He didn't say anything. He just sat and watched and let himself be in the room. Nora looked up at him, radiant. "It's going to be okay, Papa. I can tell." He looked at his daughter. He looked at Clara, who was still focused on the task, still holding herself with that careful stillness he was beginning to understand was not coldness at all, but the posture of a woman who had learned to protect the things that mattered by not letting anyone see how much they mattered. "Yeah," he said, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "I think you might be right." Clara heard it. She kept her hands steady and her eyes on the rabbit and did not turn around. but she felt something give way in the place she had been holding tightest, like the first creak of a door that had been shut a long time, not open yet, not even close to open, but the lock had shifted, just the lock for now. That was enough. The rabbit lived through the night. Clara checked it twice, once at midnight, once at 4 in the morning. Both times she found it in the box Nora had lined with a dish towel, breathing in small, steady pulls. Its heartbeat no longer panicked but settled into something that felt like decision. Like it had made up its mind. She went back to bed the second time and lay in the dark and thought about decisions. She had said one night. Then she had said month trial, both parties walk away clean. She had been very precise about her terms, very careful, because precision and care were the tools she used to keep herself from wanting things she couldn't afford to want. The problem was that somewhere between Rosie saying "I'm glad you came" and a rabbit breathing in a dish towel box, her precision had started to feel less like armor, and more like something she was wearing in a house that was too warm for it. She was still thinking about this when she heard the front door. The back door was ranch business, boots and barn smell, normal hours. The front door was different. The front door at 5 in the morning was something that made her sit up. She heard Holt's voice, low and controlled. Then another voice, louder, the particular volume of someone who had decided that volume was authority. Clara sat still for 3 seconds. Then she got up. She stopped at the top of the stairs. Through the half-open front door, she could see Holt on the porch, one hand on the frame, his back to her. On the step stood a man she didn't recognize, heavyset, well-dressed in the way that some men in small towns are well-dressed, meaning the clothes were expensive and the manners weren't. "My offer stands, Calloway. It has stood for 2 years and my patience is not without limits." "Your patience," Holt said, "is your business. My land is mine." "Your land is mortgaged to a bank that I have considerable influence with. That's simply worth knowing." "I'm aware of it." "Morning, then." The man left. Holt stood with his hand on the door for a moment. Then he turned and saw Clara on the stairs. Something moved through his face, not embarrassment exactly, more like the expression of a man who had been managing something in the dark and had just been found by unexpected light. "I apologize if that woke you," he said. "Who is that?" He took his hat off. "That habit. A man who has wanted this land for 2 years. Mortgage." She came down 2 steps. "Is it bad?" His jaw tightened. "It's manageable." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a moment with that direct, steady gaze. Then, "It was bad last year. Drought took the hay crop. I had to choose between the cattle feed and the mortgage payment. I chose the cattle." He turned the hat brim once. "I've been catching up since. Catching up takes time, and this man has been circling this property since before me died." The name came out controlled. "He knew she was sick before I was willing to admit it. He came to me when she had 2 weeks left and made me an offer." His voice went flat. "I told him what I thought of that." Clara descended the last 2 steps. "He'll come back. Men like that always come back." "Has influence with the bank. There's a difference between owning it and the difference gets smaller the longer you're behind," she said. "You should have told me this when you made the offer. Everything relevant to your employment. A man trying to take this ranch from you is relevant to my employment." She kept her voice level. "It affects the stability of this household, which affects those girls, which is exactly what you hired me to help protect." Silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before, heavier, more honest. "Right," he said, without resistance. "Tell me the rest, all of it." He told her after the girls went out for morning chores. Both hands around his coffee cup, no performance, just the facts. The mortgage 8 months behind at its worst. Gotten down to 3 months behind by selling off part of the South herd, a decision that had cost him. The man, Alderman Prout, buying up land across the Eastern Valley for 4 years. The Hayes Ranch sitting in the middle of what Prout had apparently decided was his by inevitability. And the bank's primary man having been to Prout's house for dinner no fewer than 5 times in the last year. "So the bank isn't neutral," Clara said. "Bank is a business. Prout makes himself useful to businesses. If you miss another payment, 60-day clause, 2 missed payments and they can call the note." Clara set her cup down. "How far behind are you right now?" 1 month. "The next payment is due 28 days. The cash situation." His jaw moved. "Tight." "How tight?" He looked at her directly. I can make it, if the summer cattle sale comes through at the price I'm counting on. A pause. And if it doesn't, I'll make it anyway. It wasn't stubbornness. It was something harder, the bone-deep determination of a man who had decided this land was what stood between his children and nothing, and was going to hold it with everything he had. Clara looked at him across the table. She had no business feeling what she was feeling, which was approximately equal parts respect and a specific dangerous tenderness that comes from watching someone refuse to break. She filed it behind the professional wall. Then we keep the household costs low for the next 30 days. I can stretch a food budget. I've done it before. He blinked. Whatever he had expected her to say, it wasn't that. Bose, Clara, she said, surprising herself. A pause. Clara. Her name and his voice had a weight she hadn't been prepared for. You don't have to. I'm not taking on anything outside my job. Managing this household well includes managing it within its means. Let me do my job. He held her gaze for a long moment. All right, he said quietly. Outside, Nora screamed, not the hurt kind. Clara had already learned the difference, the loud, outraged scream of someone who had been profoundly wronged. They were both out the back door before the echo faded. Nora was standing in the yard with her hands on her hips, leveling a formal accusation at one of the ranch hands, a young man of about 19 who was losing his fight with a smile. He left the gate open and Chester got out, and Chester is in the garden again. Chester, it turned out, was a goat. Chester was in the vegetable garden. Chester was eating a tomato with the serene, unbothered confidence of an animal who had done this many times and expected to do it many more. Nora, go get Chester. Should have to get Chester. He's the one who, Magnolia Nora Calloway. Nora went to get Chester. She retrieved the goat with an air of profound personal martyrdom, hauling it by the collar back toward its pen while Chester helped himself to a second tomato en route. Nora's running commentary on this injustice involved vocabulary that made Holt pinch the bridge of his nose. Clara stood beside him in the yard and watched, and something broke open in her that she had been keeping very carefully sealed. Not sadness, the opposite of sadness, which was why it was so hard to manage. Joy without warning is harder than grief. Grief you can brace for. Joy just arrives, she laughed. It came out before she could stop it, real laughter, not the polite kind, not the managed kind, but the helpless kind that takes over your whole face and your shoulders and won't be recalled. She put her hand over her mouth half a second too late. Holt looked at her. She couldn't read his expression fully yet. She was still learning the language of his face, but something in it was stripped of its careful management. Open, in a way she suspected he did not often allow. Don't, he said when she started to apologize. Don't apologize for that. She looked at him. He looked at her. Across the yard, Nora was informing Chester in vivid detail about his future. Rosie had appeared from the henhouse to observe the proceedings with calm judicial interest. Clara looked away first. She had to. The alternative was something she wasn't ready for. Still here, good. Like this video and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. The smile lasted 4 hours. That was how long it took for Clara to go from standing in the kitchen feeling something cautiously, terrifyingly close to hope, to sitting at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock that night holding a letter she had not expected, her hands very still and her chest very cold. She had found it when she finally unpacked the second bag properly. She'd been putting it off. Unpacking properly felt like planting a flag, and she hadn't been ready. But she'd reached into the side pocket for her brush and found the envelope there where she'd tucked it 3 weeks ago and tried to forget. She hadn't forgotten. She had just been pretending. She put it on the table and looked at it. Her name in handwriting she knew too well. A postmark from a town 2 states west. She didn't need to open it. She had read it enough times that the words were already inside her, sitting there the way old injuries sit inside a body, quiet until something presses on them. You can run from what you are, Clara, but it follows you. It always does, her mother's sister. Aunt Helen, who had taken her in at 16 and made it clear every single day for 3 years that taking someone in was not the same as wanting them. Who had said, the day Clara finally left, good. One less thing I have to look at that reminds me of your mother. Clara hadn't contacted Helen in 5 years. Helen had found her anyway, using the network of church women and county gossip that connected the entire middle of the country like an invisible wire. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, forwarded twice, and it said one simple thing dressed up in 3 paragraphs: come back where you belong. Meaning nowhere. She folded it, set it on the table, sat in the quiet kitchen of a man she had known for 2 days, and felt the familiar weight of the question she had never fully escaped. What if she's right? What if this, the girls, the rabbit, the laughter in the yard, the way he says your name, what if this is just another version of the same story? The one where you start to feel like you belong somewhere, and then you find out you were wrong. She was so deep inside it that she didn't hear the footsteps until Rosie was already in the doorway. The child had that quality, moving quietly, appearing without announcement. She stood in her nightgown with her hair down and her serious eyes finding Clara's face with an accuracy that went past ordinary sight. Not asleep, Rosie said. Neither are you. Rosie came into the kitchen and sat down across from Clara, which was not what Clara had expected. She'd expected a glass of water, a bad dream, something manageable. Instead, Rosie sat down with the deliberate weight of someone who had come on purpose. Her eyes moved to the letter on the table, back to Clara's face. She said nothing. Bad dream? Clara asked. No. Rosie folded her hands on the table. I heard you come down, the 3rd step creaks, that's how I know. A pause. It's how I knew when Papa couldn't sleep either after Mama died. He'd sit down here and I'd lie upstairs listening to him be sad. Clara's chest tightened. You didn't go to him. I tried once. He sent me back to bed, said it was too late for little girls. Rosie's expression was neutral, reporting a fact, but underneath the neutrality was the residue of a 4-year-old lying in the dark listening to her father hurt alone. I think he didn't want me to see, was trying to protect you. I know that now. A pause. I didn't know it then. Then I just thought he wanted to be sad by himself. She looked at the letter again. Is that from someone who hurt you? Clara looked at this child, 6 years old. 6 years old with those ancient eyes and that steady, undeflectable way of seeing things. She thought about redirecting. Some comfortable vagueness that adults used with children to sidestep the hard things. She prepared the words. Then she remembered what she had told Rosie at the breakfast table that morning. I won't do that because it wouldn't be honest, and I think you're too smart for promises that aren't honest, she said. Rosie nodded slowly, like she had known and needed the confirmation. Is it going to make you leave? No. Clara felt the word land differently than it would have landed 24 hours ago, not a professional statement of terms, something that came from further down. It's just old noise. Things people from your past say to remind you that you don't get to have good things. Rosie was quiet for a moment. Papa says some people are broken in ways that make them break other people. He says it's not about the person they're breaking. It's about what's wrong with them. Your father is a wise man. He's mostly right about people, a measured acknowledgement. He was right about you. Doesn't know me yet, said. Rosie stopped, her lips pressed together, something debating behind her eyes. What did he say? Clara asked. I was supposed to be asleep. I see, was talking to himself. He does that when he thinks we're asleep. He says it helps him think. Another pause, longer. He said you were the first person who had walked into this house in 2 years and made it feel like a house again. Kitchen was very quiet. Clara picked up the letter. She walked to the stove. She lifted the iron plate, dropped the letter in, and set the plate back down. 20 seconds and it was gone. Rosie stared at her with wide eyes. Then something extraordinary happened. Rosie smiled, a real smile, unguarded and sudden. It transformed her serious face completely into the face of the 6-year-old she actually was. Good, she said. Go to bed, Rosie. Yes, ma'am, Rosie said, and padded back upstairs without another word. Clara stood at the stove with warm iron under her palms and something burning clear and steady in her chest that she was, finally, cautiously beginning to allow. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Clara learned the stove's moods, the well pump's temper which floorboards announced themselves. She learned that Nora ate faster when she was excited and slower when something was bothering her, and that the way to find out which it was to ask about something unrelated and let the conversation find its own way. She learned that Rosie's silence was not absence. Rosie was always listening, always working something out in that methodical, private interior of hers. She learned that Holt woke at 4:45 and spent 15 minutes on the porch before going to the barn, and that those 15 minutes were the only ones he took for himself all day. She learned that he never complained, not about the work, the weather, the circling of Alderman Prout. But sometimes at the end of supper, he would look around the table at his daughters, and there would be something in his face that was not quite peace but was aimed in that direction. And it lasted for exactly as long as it lasted before he stood and said, "All right, let's clear up." She had started orienting her day around that moment. That was what she had to be careful with. The cattle sale happened on a Wednesday, 14 days into the trial period. Holt left before dawn and didn't come back until late afternoon. Clara kept the girls busy baking, the rabbits' ongoing recovery, Nora's hair, Rosie's reading, and did not count the hours. She counted everyone. When the wagon came through the gate, the girls ran out. Clara stayed on the porch. She watched his face when he stepped down, and she read it before he said a word. His shoulders were different, the way they carried his body, the set of them. She had learned his body's language the same way she'd learned the house. Those shoulders said it had gone through. He looked up and found her on the porch. And for one unguarded moment before the girls reached him, he just looked at her with something full and uncomplicated in his face, and she felt it land in the center of her chest like a hand pressed there. Then Nora hit him at full speed. "Did you bring anything?" He produced candy from his coat pocket while both girls climbed him like small determined trees and looked over their heads at Clara on the porch and said, "It went through. Full price." "I heard," she said. "The mortgage is handled. 2 months paid forward. We're clear." She noticed the we she didn't think he had. "I told you you'd make it," she said. He looked at her for a moment, just a moment. "Yeah," he said, quiet and certain. "You did." Trouble with Prout came 4 days later, not a man at the front door this time. A piece of paper, official, formally worded, delivered by the sheriff's deputy with an apologetic expression that said he didn't like his errand. Holt read it at the kitchen table. Clara watched his face and saw the moment he reached the critical part because his jaw set and his hands went flat on the table. "What is it?" He looked up. The girls were outside. They were alone in the kitchen. "Prout is filing a petition with the county, claiming this ranch is operating in violation of public decency statutes." His voice was stripped flat. "He says that my housing an unmarried woman without a formal arrangement constitutes conduct unfit for a home with minor children. He's petitioning for a welfare review of the girls." Air in the kitchen changed. Clara felt it in her body before she processed it with her mind. The specific cold of someone using her existence as a weapon against something she cared about. "He's using me," she said. "He's using everything available to him. If they review, they won't find anything wrong with this household. But they'll find a woman with no references in this county, no one in town who can speak to her character, living under your roof." She kept her voice even. She was going to stay even about this if it took everything she had. "Griffin, that is what they will find." She had used his first name without thinking. She noticed when she saw the slight movement in his face. "He's not coming after your land anymore. He's coming after your daughters to get your land." Holt stood up. The kitchen was not a large room and it became smaller. "Know what he's doing. Then you know that my being here makes it easier for him." Words cost more than she'd expected. "I'm not saying I've done anything wrong. I'm saying I know how this works. I have spent my entire life watching people use the fact of me as a reason to take things from people who didn't deserve to lose them. And I will not be the reason Prout gets his leverage." "You are not leaving." She looked at him. "You are not leaving," he said again with the same clean certainty he'd used with Rosie at breakfast. Not loud, not performed, just certain. "I hired you to do a job. You have done nothing to be ashamed of, and I am not going to let this man dictate who is welcome in my home." Something cracked through the control of his voice. Just a hairline fracture, but she heard it. "My daughters need you here." Clara stared at him. The fracture had opened something in the room, and neither of them quite knew what to do with it. "It's not that simple," she said. "Maybe not." He stepped closer. "Not much, just enough. But some things are worth being complicated for." She looked at him. All of him, the hat in his hands, the honest eyes, the 3 years of holding things together alone, and the 2 daughters who checked on rabbits and said, "I'm glad you came," and meant every syllable. "There are options," she said carefully. "That we haven't, I know what the options are." His voice had gone quieter, lower. "I've been sitting with them for 4 days. 4 days. Her breath came out differently. "You've known 4 days. I wanted to handle it before it reached you." "That is exactly the kind of thing you said you wouldn't do." His jaw tight. I know, I'm telling you now. What did you decide? He turned the hat brim once. He looked at it the way he looked at things when he was deciding how to say something honest. Then he looked up. The simplest answer to Prute's claim is to make the claim false, he said. But that is not something I would do without asking you, and I know it is not a simple thing to ask. Room was very quiet. Asking me to marry you, Clara said. I'm asking if you consider it. His voice was absolutely steady. I'm not asking out of convenience. I'm not asking to solve a problem. I'm asking because these 2 weeks have been. He stopped, started again. I'm asking because I meant what Rosie heard me say. This house is more itself with you in it, and I would like it to stay that way. Sound from outside had stopped. The yard was quiet. The whole ranch was quiet. Clara stood with her hands at her sides and felt every single thing she had ever armored herself against trying to come through at once. The wanting, the terror, the bone-tired longing for something that would stay. And underneath all of it, like a root that had been growing in the dark for 2 weeks without permission, the truth she had been most careful not to examine. She already knew the answer. She just needed a moment to let herself know it. Need a night, she said. Her voice was not as steady as she wanted. Ask me again tomorrow when I've had time to make sure I'm answering with my head and not just what? He asked quietly. She looked at him. All of him. Tomorrow, she said. He nodded. He set his hat back on his head. He walked to the back door and paused with his hand on the frame, his back to her. What it's worth, he said without turning around. I already have my answer. I'm just waiting on yours. He went out to the barn. Clara stood in the kitchen for a long time, hands pressed flat against the table, holding herself still enough to let something in. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the cottonwoods and turned his words over slowly, the way you turn something you are afraid of dropping. I've already got my answer. I'm just waiting on yours. She had spent 9 years building a life out of not needing anyone to wait on her, out of arriving and leaving on her own terms, keeping her bags where she could reach them, never letting a place get so far under her skin that leaving would cost her something she couldn't recover from. She had been very good at it. She had turned it into a kind of dignity. I don't need, therefore I cannot be hurt. And she had worn that dignity like the most practical garment she owned. Now she was lying in a room that smelled like cedar and old quilts, in a house that had learned her footstep, listening to the breathing of 2 children down the hall who said her name like it belonged in their mouths. The dignity felt less like armor, and more like a coat she had been wearing indoors all summer. Hot, unnecessary. Kept on out of habit, not need. She got up at 4:30. She dressed in the dark and went downstairs and put the coffee on and stood at the kitchen window and had the most honest conversation with herself she'd had in years. You are afraid, yes. You have been afraid this whole time, yes. And it hasn't stopped you from doing a single thing since you arrived. She stood with that. It was true. She had been afraid on the wagon ride from the depot, and she had braided Nora's hair anyway. She had been afraid at supper the first night, and she had sat down and eaten with his family anyway. She had been afraid every morning since, and she had gotten up and made the coffee and kept her promise to Rosie. Fear, it turned out, was not the obstacle she had always treated it as. Fear was just the feeling you carried while you did the thing anyway. She heard the front door at 4:45. Exactly on time. She poured a second cup of coffee. She carried both cups to the front door and opened it. He was at the porch rail with his back to her, hat in hand, watching the sky go gray at the edges. He turned when he heard the door, looked at her, looked at the 2 cups. Something moved through his face, quick, unguarded, then managed. She held out the second cup. He took it. They stood together at the rail in the early dark, watching the night thin out. Have questions, she said. Ask them. If this doesn't work, she held her cup with both hands. If it doesn't work, the girls are protected from it. Whatever happens between us, they don't carry the fallout. They've had enough. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. And if I have opinions about this ranch, about decisions, about money, about Prute, I expect to be heard, not managed, not protected from information. Always, he said. You've made that requirement fairly clear. I'm making it again. Heard, she looked at the sky. A long breath. Then the real one, the one underneath the practical ones, the one she had been circling all night. I need to know that I'm not a solution, that this isn't about the petition or Prute or what the girls need, that I'm not. Stop. Quiet but firm. He turned toward her. Look at me. She looked at him. I told Rosie you made this house feel like a house again, I didn't know she was listening, but I said it because it was true. That is not a problem being solved. That is just what is true. He held her gaze with that complete, unflinching steadiness she had come to understand was simply how he was built. Prute's petition is a problem. You are not. You are. The muscle in his jaw moved. You are the reason I have sat through supper for 2 weeks feeling like myself again. That is not nothing. Sky was getting lighter. She could hear the birds starting. I'm not easy, she said. I need you to understand that I'm not. I have been alone a long time and I have sharp edges and I will not sand them down to be comfortable to live with. I know, he said, and the steadiness in it was not impatience, not dismissal. It was a man saying, I have seen your sharp edges and I am not asking you to change them. It was a man saying, I am not afraid of you. She had not had that before. She had not known until this exact moment, standing in the early dark with a cup of coffee and her whole chest cracked open, how much she had needed someone to simply not be afraid of her. Yes, she said. He went very still. That's my answer. She looked at him directly. Yes. And the careful management went out of his face entirely all at once, leaving something plain and undefended and overwhelmed in the best possible way. He set his cup on the rail. He took hers and set it beside his. He took both her hands and his were warm and solid and real. Right, he said, in a voice that came from somewhere so much deeper than his chest that she felt it in her own. All right, she said back. They stood like that while the sky finished deciding to be morning. She told the girls at breakfast. She had prepared the right words, the right tone, age-appropriate, not too much, not too little. A careful and reasonable explanation. What actually happened was that she and Holt came in from the porch together, and Nora took one look at both of their faces and said at full volume, Are you getting married? Nora, Holt started. I knew it, Nora announced to the room. Rosie, I told you. You did not tell me, Rosie said with complete accuracy. I thought it loudly, which is essentially the same thing. It is not the same thing at all. Girls, Clara said. They both stopped. She sat down at the table. She looked at them. Nora vibrating with barely contained delight. Rosie sitting very still, hands flat on the table, working through something more complicated than her sister. Yes, Clara said. We are, if that's all right with you both. Nora said immediately, and with her whole body. Rosie didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved from Clara to her father and back to Clara. Clara let her look, didn't rush it, didn't fill the silence. You said you'd tell me before you left, Rosie said finally. I did. So you're not leaving? No. A silence. Rosie looked down at her hands. Her jaw was set, that prepared, calcified jaw, but as Clara watched, something gave way in it. Slowly, the way ice gives way in early spring, not all at once, but in pieces, the cold pulling back from the surface until what was underneath could finally come up. Rosie looked up. Her eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together, fighting it, then stopped fighting. "'Kay," she said, in a voice that was more breath than sound. Then she got up from the table, walked around to Clara's chair, and put her arms around Clara's neck from behind. She held on with the quiet ferocity of a child who had been carefully not hoping for something for a very long time, and had just been given permission. Clara put her hand over the small arms around her neck and held on back. Nora climbed onto Clara's lap from the front, completing things entirely, and said into her shoulder, "Can I call you Mama?" The kitchen went absolutely silent. Holt made a sound. Clara held both girls and looked at the ceiling and breathed through it. "You can call me whatever feels right," she said when she could manage the words. "There's no rush." Nora considered this for approximately 2 seconds. "Mama," she said decisively. Rosie's arms tightened around Clara's neck. Clara looked at Holt over both their heads. He was standing at the counter with his coffee forgotten in his hand, and his face entirely open, no management, no control, nothing held back. A man seeing something he had given up expecting and had just been given back. She held his gaze. He held hers. "We are going to be all right," she thought. And for the first time in 9 years, the thought did not feel dangerous. It felt like a fact. They were married on a Saturday at the end of August. Martha Connell from the Ladies' Committee came. She sat in the 4th row with a complicated expression that had traveled over the course of a month from hostile to uncertain to something approaching respect. She brought a pie. Clara thanked her for it and meant it, because whatever Martha Connell was, she had come, and that was what mattered. The girls wore clean dresses, their hair properly braided. Nora's by Clara's hands that morning. Rosie's by her own, though she had allowed Clara to add the ribbon. Holt said his vows looking directly at her. No performance. No ceremony in it. Just the words said to her face, the same way he said everything that mattered plainly, clearly, meaning every syllable. She said hers back the same way. No more precision as armor. No more careful management of the wanting. She stood in front of this man and said the words with her whole chest open and her hands steady and her sharp edges completely intact. And she meant them the way you mean things when you have finally stopped being afraid of meaning them. Nora cried. She had predicted that. Rosie did not cry. She had predicted that too. But Rosie held Clara's hand for the entire walk back to the wagon and did not let go until she had to. And that was worth every ceremony in the world. On the ride home, Nora fell asleep against her sister's shoulder exactly as she had on that first ride from the depot. The same road, the same horse, the same late afternoon light, and Rosie stayed awake, watching just as she had then. But this time Rosie looked at Clara and said quietly, with a certainty that had come from somewhere deeper than hope, "You're the staying kind." Clara thought about every road she had ever taken, every place she had arrived and left, the letter at the bottom of the stove, the depot bench in the July heat, the door closed in her face, all of it which had turned out, none of it to be an ending. She looked at Rosie. She looked at Holt beside her, reins in his steady hands. She looked at the road going forward all the way to the gate of the ranch that was hers now, the house with the cedar chest and the window that faced the creek. "Yeah," she said, "I am." If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Redwood Chronicles. New stories drop every week. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. I read every single one.